Whether you're conquering professional exams or personal milestones, we welcome you to Beyond Clean's Confidence Certification, the 52-week test prep podcast series. With expert insights, actionable tips, and engaging discussions, we'll break down the toughest concepts in sterile processing and build your confidence every step of the way. Join host Sarah B. Cruz as she embarks on a mission to help you not just prep for tests, but craft your success story. And now your host, Sarah B. Cruz.
Hello and welcome. You're listening to Confidence Certification, a 52-week test prep podcast series to equip you to take your sterile processing career to the next level. I'm your host, Sarah B. Cruz, and on this episode, we are going to talk about training and educating yourself. Now, a lot of the times you hear those words getting thrown around almost interchangeably, and I think it's going to be important to remember that they are not the same thing. And before we get going into the meat and potatoes of this episode, let's welcome back our work BFF, Bobby Parker. Hey, Bobby.
What's going on, Sarah? Thanks for having me on the show.
Oh, yeah, it's my pleasure. And the listeners, they love having you, and it's just great. And before we really get into it, let's just take a second to thank our listeners again. It's such an honor to be a part of your certification journey. The big thing to remember about journeys is that they don't become pathways. They don't become our story until we continuously walk down them. So really, Beyond Clean and the Confidence Certification podcast is merely the gate to the beginning of your path and your journey to confidence certification. And not to speak for Bobby, but to speak for Bobby, I know we're stoked to be a part of that.
Absolutely. It's what it's all about.
So confidence certification is designed to take all of our listeners' realities into consideration when we talk about study skills and test prep, because no tech or no future sterile processing professional is the same. And that's going to be the focus of today's episode. How can we incorporate our department education into our study? How can we take our training in our department, if you already have a job in the sterile processing field? And if you don't, that doesn't mean this episode's not for you, folks, okay? Because you will get a job in sterile processing. We need professionals with integrity like you. I mean, listen, like Bobby, they're checking out a show before they're even certified. Yes, please come work in my facility. But I want to give some of our listeners a way to incorporate their training into the education that they're gaining with certification. What do you think, Bobby?
Yeah, that's beautiful. And yeah, you're halfway there if you're plugged into this already. You know, we're talking about training in the department and education that you seek out yourself. There's a lot of value in seeking out education and podcasts. And so being here is certainly half of it. But that distinction, I think, might be a new one for folks. It's one that I haven't spent a lot of time thinking about, the difference between training and education. But as you think about it in your workplace, I would wager that you would probably have different roles for people that you would call a trainer and a person that you would call an educator, just thinking about the people milling around your sterile processing department. So looking forward to diving into maybe the difference between those two things and how we can leverage that to be more effective in preparing for our certifications.
Oh, yeah, sure. And kudos to the department that has both, BT dubs. I realized that a sterile processing educator, especially a sterile processing educator that was a sterile processing professional, that maybe career growth into becoming a department educator, they're seldom, right? And there's so few of them, and people clamor and crave for trainers, preceptors, educators in their department. So if you have them, that's great. And if you are a trainer or you are an educator, please note that this is just a conversation. This isn't a knock on your position or what I think you should or shouldn't be doing. But typically, a trainer maintains processes and standard works that are already in place, because part of their quality assurance program is that they're achieving what they want in those processes. So the trainer is reiterating processes and, sitting down, teaching you how to Lay out a set. Lay out a set. Don't dump it on the table. I know I'm one of those, right? So how you lay out a set, do you separate your instruments by categories? Do you inspect them and then check it off of your electronic tracking system count sheet? Or are you checking all of them and then checking it off? So that's what a trainer's primary focus is maintaining process and training individuals on how to get into the quality assurance that's already put in place by the department. Whereas an educator is typically the person that's creating these processes alongside or under the department manager. The department manager can typically tell them what their goals are and what C-suite's goals are. And then the educator and the manager can work together. Or sometimes educators report to the department manager to create processes and the necessary foundational learning to have that training aspect in place. And that's really what this podcast is, essentially, is the educational aspect. That's what your book is. We're trying to give you the foundation so that you can gain the practice. So if you're already in the field, you have the practice, and now you're trying to gain the foundation. Does that make sense, Bobby?
It does make a lot of sense. And maybe to oversimplify it, education related to sterile processing should be the same across all facilities, even in some cases internationally, right? As you mentioned, it's that foundation. It's the reason why we do things. It's the scientific principles behind why we do things. But the application of that education turns out to be that training, those local policies and procedures, which can be wildly different between facilities. And I've experienced that personally, just being a manager and bringing in technicians who have prior experience. We loved to bring in technicians with prior experience because they often had a lot that they could teach us as they learned about our process, had great ideas that they brought with them. And that's the good side of it. Sometimes we brought in technicians with experience that had some bad habits from previous facilities or had conflated and confused these two things, the education and the training. And they thought the way they had done it at their prior facility must be the golden standard and there must be no other way. And we're definitely doing it wrong if we're not doing it the way that they did where that person came from. And so the difference between those two things, the training and the education, really important on a practical sterile processing workflow basis, but it actually comes into play quite a bit around studying for your certification as well. Am I right?
Oh, 100%. And that's why it's so important that we address it in this way. And I wanted to speak specifically and inclusively with everybody else, but more specifically to our partners already in the department. Because sometimes we think, well, I do this every day. I don't need to study, right? Whereas it's true. The knowledge and the application that professionals have in the field is huge. I mean, even the first 3 months of my sterile processing career, I felt like my brain was going to explode and I was terrible at it. You know, there was just so much to learn and to do. And that's education and training are both learning moments, right? But the difference between what you're going to see on your certification test isn't where is the start button on the autoclave? How do you select a load cycle on an autoclave? You know, I don't write the tests. You know, I don't know what the composition of the tests are, but the tests will be more concerned with what is a dynamic air removal cycle? How many pulses are there? What are the different phases of sterilization? You know, not what's happening inside the sterilizer after you press start. And that's where that education comes in with your supplemental training. And before we get into it deeper, let's just take a small break and let that sit with us. And we'll get a word from our sponsors and a mid-session confidence boost. It's time for our mid-episode confidence boost, where we focus on a key sterile processing test concept. Now, there's no guarantee these concepts will be on the test that you take, but they are key concepts to the workplace and are discussed in the literature. Today, we'll cover ultrasonic cleaners. Ultrasonic cleaners are automated cleaners that transmit sound waves through the cleaning solution and perform cavitation. They are found in the decontamination area. It's important that we only ultrasonic devices that have been approved by their manufacturer for this processing method. Advantages of ultrasonic cleaning include efficiency, consistency, reliability. It's more efficient than manual cleaning alone, so it can also help increase productivity. They are the follow-up support to our manual cleaning practices at our sink in decontamination. They are available in a variety of models. You have your tabletop units that are small, probably used for dental instruments or even eye instruments. Single chamber consoles that typically only clean. Dual chamber consoles where they clean in one chamber and rinse in the other. And then we get a little crazy and there's the multi-chamber units, usually having 3 chambers that clean in one chamber, rinse in the other, and then even dries in the third. And then just to get a little fancy, there's something called a lumen irrigating flushing unit that is specially designed to ultrasonic cannulated instruments. That's going to wrap this week's mid-session confidence boost. Good luck. Hey everybody, welcome back. If you're just joining us, who joins a podcast episode right in the middle of it? No, I'm just kidding. But if you're just joining us, go ahead and restart the entire episode. Or if you've taken a break because your lunch break ended and now you're back 4 hours later, just go ahead and start this episode over because we are speaking very acutely to our professionals already in the field as we talk about applying our training habits and processes into our education and our studying in sterile processing, because this is going to be a really great way to help us right size and refocus on what we need to study and what we may believe we already know. I don't know, Bobby, did you ever go into your test thinking you knew everything? I know I did, but I failed a bunch, so there we go.
Certainly not. But I think I had a few people out in front of me who had made the mistake that you brought up before the break about, I do this every day. I surely can handle this. And so I remember in the department that I was working in, we had a few different options on how to get our certification. There was a local school that had a program that you could go through, or you could just take the book and read it and test against it that way. And as technicians, those options being presented before us, it was a cheaper route to do the self-study method. And so a lot of people were going that direction. That's the way that I went. I know we're going to talk about how to do that successfully and maybe not so successfully, but there were a handful of technicians that had some years of experience right around the time the hospital was incorporating a policy of having to get certified. And they thought, I've been doing this for 3-5 years. I certainly can handle it. And so they would maybe skim read through the workbook, which we talked about before, or blitz through the book and take it. And not all of them succeeded at that. And whenever I took my test, I began to understand why. Because like you said, it wasn't necessarily about, which OR Dr. Smith works in, things that we have memorized and we work every day, but things like how to calculate the absolute pressure in a steam sterilizer and understanding things like the atmospheric pressure at sea level, or how to differentiate between the different types of water filtration systems that are present in sterile processing departments. I had never even seen the water filter in my sterile processing department. And so I was so thankful for the fear that was instilled in me by others, I guess, to really dig into that material and not rely solely on my training.
Yeah, and I think you bring up a really interesting point because it made me think of my journey, whereas I went to school before I got my job. I got my first sterile processing job before I finished the program. So I thought I was like, oh, I'm the best. Look at how good I am. I got a job before I even finished the cert. No, it was just, we really needed sterile processing professionals in my state. It was like that level. No, I'm just kidding. But I felt so good about myself that I got a job before I even finished the program that I think that was a big part of why I didn't really push to study as hard as I needed to, because I was kind of resting on the fact that I was like, well, I'm good enough to get a job, so I'm good enough to get this test, right? So it's interesting hearing the professional that isn't certified, didn't go to a program, has been working in the field for a while versus myself who started working in the field while I was going to school. And it was really overwhelming personally because I was trying to learn why while I was trying to learn how. And it was so overwhelming. It was so overwhelming. Learning the how And like you said, calculating the pressure, no, I don't even want to do addition and subtraction. I'm not calculating. Like, I don't want to do that. I don't want to see the filter in my autoclave because that means something's broken and it was probably my fault. So.
Oh, that's good. And you talk about the how and the why, and we're drawing this sharp division between training and education. And we've been throwing a lot of shade at training, so far of, that's what you need to get the job done. But to get your certification, you really need to hone in and focus in on that education. And I don't know that that's necessarily an accurate way to depict it. Obviously, if you don't read your book, you're not going to succeed. And that's the point that we're getting at. But there is value in, utilizing your department specific training and helping you be successful in your study. Have you found that to be the case, and have any advice for us on how to use training well for certification prep?
Oh, yeah, sure. So like I said, I had to get certified within a certain amount of time from getting my first job as part of my state law. So that is a motivator. Let me tell you, already having a job in the sterile processing field, especially in states like that or not, are great motivation. You may have to pass to keep your job. Maybe your facility gives you a pay raise. The classic reasons on why we go and get certified already in the space. So I think that working in your department is huge motivation. And it gives you a really great opportunity to have that comprehension dialogue with yourself. As you're loading your autoclave truck and you're about to press start, you can take what you're reading in the manual and talk to yourself about it. Listen, okay, so in case you guys haven't noticed this, I literally talk to myself in the department all the time. Like some people, sometimes I'm a mutterer, but it's not a bad thing. But you could have these comprehension conversations with yourself, and taking what you're learning and verbalizing what you're seeing and doing.
We're all like, Sarah, are you okay?
No, I'm talking about contact time with the sterility and saturated steam, Bobby. I got this.
No, that's good. That's exactly what I'm talking about. As you're studying and reading your books, listening to podcasts, learning more about the reasons behind why we do things, why we pick the particular sterilizer load, why we load that truck the way that it is, why we need water filtration and the different types of water filtration that are in the department. It can improve our training. It can make us remember what we're trying to learn, particularly in that initial orientation period. But the converse is also true. If you were to take somebody who was a total test whiz and just hand them a sterile processing manual and tell them to study it and pass the exam, they could probably do it. They wouldn't be certified because they didn't get those hands-on hours, but they could probably pass it. But if you come back to them 3-4 years down the road with specific questions about that, they probably wouldn't be able to remember. Whereas as you're pairing these two things together, your facility specific training with the education that you're getting through studying, it's going to make you a better technician, and you're less likely to forget which button to push on that sterilizer, or how to load your particular cart, or how to load your instrument washer, or who to call when the water filter breaks down, and all sorts of different things, because you are pursuing both well, your education and then applying that to your training. Yeah,
and just to say it simply, working in a department while you're trying to get certified gives you an edge. It really does. No tea, no shade. I know it was a little heavy in the beginning, but seriously, if you're already in a department, you have such an edge. If you're not, don't worry, don't get anxious, right? You're going to be great. You'll get a job right when you get certified. It's going to be wonderful. But if you're in that department and you're applying your actions there, it may even give you that opportunity to apply process improvement, be that breath of fresh air. Now, how you bring up the process improvement ideas, that's going to be a thing if you're already in the field. Make sure you're bringing up good ideas in a good way in an opportune time. There's tons of presentations about that in our industry. You could probably Google it and just say how to bring up a good idea without making everybody hate you. And it really does give you that edge, because now you already know how and you know why. That's that beautiful comprehension. And that is what makes sound sterile processing professionals, not just great test takers.
And when you bring it up in the right way, that's going to be a breath of fresh air, right? One of the most valuable things that a department can have are fresh eyes, and to have somebody come in, see your processes, they're reading the book, and they can come and say, hey, I'm reading this in my manual. It seems to say something different than what we're doing. Can you explain to me why, or help me understand why we do it the way that we do? And you might get the response of, it doesn't say that, or really, it says that? And you can go on this journey together and make some improvements for the patients in your facility. And so, yeah, super important to hold these things in tension. And if you're doing it well, if your department has any commitment to patient safety, they're going to love the fact that in addition to studying your policies and your procedures, you're out there trying to get as much education about the field in general as you can, and how we bring that to make our patients safer here at our facility. Mm-hmm.
And a little insider tip, you're never going to see this is how we've always done it as one of the multiple choice options on your test. Okay, so I don't have to be a test writer to tell you that. Okay, so if that's the reason why, read into your book, really understand that baseline. And sometimes when we ask ourselves, why do I do it like that? And you say, well, Betty showed me this from 15 years ago and I've been doing that the same way ever since. That's a great place to start. Like, use that indicator. If you've never asked yourself why you do something, that's a great place to start studying. Yeah, lean into that. Great place.
So, real practical question for you here, Sarah. You've got a new technician who's going through their orientation period. Maybe they're at the tail end of that. They've got their bearings and how to get through the department, but they still have a lot of questions about why things are done a particular way. And maybe they either don't have that relationship with their preceptor to ask, or maybe they're asking and they're not getting good answers about why things are being done. What resources are out there for people to discover the reason why? How do they get this, education category of foundational universal knowledge? What tools and resources do they have at their disposal?
Oh, yeah, sure. And I know Bobby and I talked a lot about this in episode 8 when we talked about the information in a textbook. Now, even textbooks can be out of date though. So make sure you're using the most relevant one when you're referencing it. So like, for example, ethylene oxide was really big when I was all the fad, was all the rage when I was taking my sterile processing tests initially. And it still exists in the healthcare space, but I have literally used it maybe once, and I used it more in veterinary medicine than I ever have in a healthcare facility in sterile processing with humans, right? So make sure you're using your references that are up to date, whether it's a textbook. You can always refer to your standards like your ST79. My personal favorite standard is the ST90, which is all about quality management systems. And they actually have really great tips in their rationale on how to bring up quality questions and concerns effectively, because it gives you source points like in your ST79 on where to go and look to see. So if you're looking up something about a sterilizer, it explains why they said that about the sterilizer, and you can use little points in it to go back to other areas of the standards, because the standards are written to cross-check and balance themselves. Of course, if you don't have that relationship with your preceptor, or maybe you're not getting the answers that you're looking for, first make sure you're not getting the answers you want to hear. There's a difference between talking to our preceptors and them telling us we're right, or them telling us we're wrong and we're like, we don't like that answer, let me go somewhere else. Okay, like if mom tells me this, dad's gonna do this, right? It's always the dads that let you go and do whatever you want. So make sure that it's the answer you're not getting, not the answer you don't want to hear. Okay. And of course, there is resources, and I always encourage conversation, specifically on LinkedIn, making sure, and we had an episode about this, making sure you vet your information and it's good quality information, but sometimes just having dialogue can help. But don't fall for these huge Facebook rant walls where you'll see, if you go into some of these Facebook groups and there's 20 different answers for one thing. And a lot of that is what Bobby had pointed out, is people are applying their policies and how they've always done it in their facility as the way everybody needs to do it. So keep that in mind as you start to vet those spaces there.
Yeah, and it's not always the individual's fault for why that inevitably happens, because in our training process, like there's so much to learn in sterile processing anyway, to go through and dice up every instruction in the department and then underlay that with an AMY standard or where this comes from the textbook would just be overwhelming. Like we would brain fry our technicians coming into the department. And so you can understand why people who maybe only worked in one particular facility for a long period of time have a hard time later on, whenever they take that next step in their career, beginning to untangle, like what were things that we did just because that was the way our facility did it, and what are universal musts that need to happen across the industry. So being involved in those kinds of discussions, like the Wild West of Facebook sterile processing groups, can really add a lot of value, because people are asking curious and creative questions, or maybe questioning some just settled thoughts in your mind. And even if you don't go there for your answers, sometimes going there for your questions is a good idea. I certainly learn a lot just by reading through those and coming across a question that I don't know the answer to. Now, I may not trust the answers that are given on there, but it certainly piques my curiosity enough to go research it and try to find the answer. So definitely a lot of value in that. And then other places that you can get information, in addition to using social media networks to have dialogue like LinkedIn and Facebook, there are lots of educational opportunities online for free through webinars, things like this podcast, digital conferences. And then your local network may have some chapter meetings or some conferences that you could attend as well. So lots of ways out there to get that education. If you feel like you're maybe in a smaller department that doesn't have a lot of resources pointed at sterile processing, this industry is very open and embraces sterile processing technicians. There is a world of people there with arms out ready to try to help you up along the way and along in your journey. You just have to know where to look.
Yeah. So hopefully some of the action items that we've given you will give you a starting point, right? So if you've been in your sterile processing facility and you're trying to get certified, just remember sterile processing is a huge industry, right? It's a big industry, but it feels like a little small industry because everybody kind of knows each other, but it's such a big space. And that's a great segue for our homework tonight. Actually, I know y'all thought you'd get away with it. Like, Sarah, I already work 40 hours a week. That's enough homework. No. So if you're in the department, I want you to go around and just take in all the processes you may be doing and you may not really understand. Remember when I had mentioned, like, why do you do that? And if you've ever asked yourself why they're done that way, and they're met with, well, this is how we've always done it, that is a great indication of how you can apply your certification test, your certification study to your hands-on position. So that's your homework tonight. I want you to go and see the processes that you're doing, probably thebomb.com, because your patients are going home without any surgical site infections and you're sending up quality sets without bioburden, right? But you still don't know why they're done that way. And then make a list of them. Remember, no one's going to see this list. I mean, you can share the list with me if you want to. I won't tell anybody. Or you could send it to info@beyondclean.net and maybe they'll forward it to me and we can go through it together. No problem. But make this list, keep it for yourself, and then go and resource it in your book. That actually might be a great place to start your study outline. Where do you even start when the book is so overwhelming? And Bobby and I did touch on this again in episode 8. So this is the beginning of your comprehension and application, right, Bobby? Like when you're mixing the how with the why, this is where that comprehension starts. Yeah.
Absolutely. It's where you connect what we're doing and why in the world we're doing it that way. And yeah, a great way to start that, even in our own department, making a list, like you said, or maybe there's some technicians who have been in those waters for so long that they don't really have a list to make. They're like, well, I think I get why we do all of the things that way. Sometimes if you certainly are a go-getter and have the access to get in another department and see how other people do it, that is a way to maybe stir up some of those questions. If you don't really have access to do that, there are some videos out there. Maybe you could look at some sterile processing processes on YouTube or something like that. That might stir up some questions for you to begin researching as well.
Excellent. And don't worry if you're not in the sterile processing department, check out some of those videos online. They have videos made by community colleges that have been sourced and created by sterile processing professionals. A lot of the times they're instructors, so they're very accurate. Please just be wary of self-made videos. Remember, those are the processes that they do in their facility, which could be a breath of fresh air, as Bobby pointed out, as we bring in the technicians that are studying, or the technicians that are studying already in our department. So as we start to talk about comprehension and as we wrap this episode, please work on your homework, because next week we're going to have a special guest on our show that actually talks about how to incorporate coaching to build our comprehension in sterile processing. Bobby, thanks again for hanging out with us. It was a good time.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Sarah.
And that's going to do it for this week's episode. For more sterile processing education and resources, make sure to visit beyondclean.net or follow Beyond Clean on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, and Instagram. And don't forget to check out over 1,000 SPD-related videos at youtube.com/beyondclean. If you have any questions or comments for the show, you can reach out to info@beyondclean.net. Finally, make sure to download the Beyond Clean mobile app on the Apple and Android app stores so that you don't miss a future episode of any of the other awesome Beyond Clean podcasts. My name's Sarah B. Cruz, and you've been listening to Confidence Certification. Until next time, keep fighting dirty and pass that test with confidence.
The views and opinions expressed in this podcast series are of Sarah B. Cruz only and do not represent the companies she works for or collaborates with.